Thanks as always to Paula for her wonderful piano. Welcome everyone to the Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of San Miguel de Allende. Bienvenidos todos al servicio dominical de los Unitarios Universalistas de San Miguel de Allende. Estamos contentos de estar juntos. We are glad to be together. You're welcome here, wherever you're tuning in from, here or on Zoom, whatever your religious background or lack of one, whatever the size of your home or your bank account, wherever you came from, whoever you love, you can bring your whole self here. Este es un lugar donde podemos traer todo nuestro ser y ser aceptados todo tal como somos con amor y amistad. My name is Susan MacDonnell, a member of a few fellowship committees, including the Sunday Service Committee, which in our lay-led fellowship is responsible for developing these services 52 weeks a year. Me llamo Susan MacDonnell y voy a servir como líder de servicio esta mañana. I'd like to make a few quick announcements. The first important reminder, today after our service, as well as next Sunday, we hope many of you will join Reverend Rosiello in the back room for an engaging conversation on the sermon topic of today. We especially encourage visitors and new members who are still learning and thinking about what UUism and what this fellowship might mean for them. So grab your coffee and goodies and meet in the back room. It's back there, right behind the water, and join others. Within about 5 or 10 minutes of the service ending, I think. It'll give you time to get what you'd like for coffee and goodies. Members of the membership committee will be at a table in the back room or out front here at the welcome table to help answer your questions about membership if you are interested. Lastly, I'll save that for another time. After the service, those on Zoom are invited to stay connected and visit with others in the main room for discussion. If you're visiting, you can type your name into the chat box, how you heard of us, and where you're from. Others on Zoom can chat with you later. Those who are with us at the Aldea can join us for coffee and cookies. Take a few minutes to check out the information table. And there's information about lunch and games and Reverend Tom's coffee hour on the back of your order of service. If we have visitors here today, we'd love it if you would just stand so that we can see who you are. And we'll make a point of saying hi to you later during coffee hour. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for coming. We do record our Sunday in-person services, and you can always find a link to these on our website, UUFSMA.org. And you can check out our activities under the Activities tab at the top. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Tom Rosiello, and I'm minister of this fellowship, and it's great to be with you again this morning. Today, our service will focus on learning about our faith tradition. And one of the most recognizable things about Unitarian Universalism today is the practice of beginning the service by lighting a chalice. That can symbolize many things: the warmth of community, the fire of commitment to the work of justice. But today especially, we light our chalice to represent the light of our faith tradition. May that light pierce the darkness of hate and despair and ignorance. May it shine as a beacon of welcome to all seeking a meaningful, liberal faith community. You know, in 3 of the Christian Gospels, there's a version of this passage. No one lights a lamp and then puts it under a bushel basket, but instead puts it on a lampstand so it can give light to all in the house. I like to think of our chalice flame like that. You know, we're not always very good about sharing the light of this faith tradition. We sometimes seem to want to keep it for ourselves. Today's service is about putting it on that lampstand, about sharing the light of tradition. And now we're going to sing one of our favorite hymns about sharing the light. But we're going to do it with a bit of a twist, so pay attention. Instead of focusing on each of our individual lights, we're going to shift the emphasis to all of us sharing our tradition's light. So today, even though the words are going to say otherwise, I hope you agree to sing instead of "This little light of mine," I'm going to let it shine. Let's change all the singulars to plural and sing "This little light of ours, we're going to let it shine." And similarly change as you go through. It's a good brain exercise, too, for you, okay? So please rise in body or spirit for our hymn and our covenant. The words will appear on the screen. It's in your book also, 118, but you don't need them. Just use the screen.
And you all remember to stay standing. So I invite you to join together in reciting our fellowship's unique covenant. This is a promise that we aspire to of how to be in relation to one another and to the larger world. Jerome will read it first for us in English, and then Sebastian in Spanish. And they're going to go slow, so try to match their speed, okay? Sometimes people race right along, and we can't keep up.
We respect the interdependent web of life and work for a just and peaceful world. We encourage the search for truth and meaning, strive for compassion in our relationships, and seek values that will benefit our lives and the lives of others. This is our covenant.
Respetamos todos los estilos de vida dentro de su red interdependiente y trabajamos por un mundo justo y pacífico. Alentamos la búsqueda de la verdad y la comprensión total. Nos esforzamos por mantener compasión en nuestras relaciones y buscamos valores que beneficien nuestras vidas y las vidas de los demás. Este es nuestro convenio.
You can be seated. Oops. There we go. Each week in our service, we take time to share the significant joys, sorrows, and concerns of our members with their community. And as we do, we light a candle, indicating that that thought, that person, that prayer is held in all our hearts this morning. In the future, if you would like to have a joy, sorrow, or concern shared, you can email it to me, or if you're coming to the service here in person, you can write it on an index card when you come into the door. And if you happen to be with us on Zoom today, please type it into the chat now, and Diego will let me know if we get any in that by that method. I'd like to light our first candle in gratitude for the life of Bob Horstoffer, who passed away at the age of 98 this past week. Longtime member, past president, graphic artist who contributed often through his talents to this fellowship, including, I believe, building this pulpit with its sign in front. You're going to receive an announcement about Bob's passing this week with more information. I've just been in touch with his daughters. Many of you remember his wife, Ann Riley, who passed away in 2020. He's survived by 3 daughters, Ellen, Antonia, and Leslie, and their families, and his dear companion, Edgar, who happens to be a cat, who's been very wonderful with Bob of late, and who now needs a good home. So I'm including that information as a notice, as a concern of our community, and there'll be more information including a photo of Edgar in the obituary information that goes out. So see if it's in your heart for a cat. I'd like to light a candle of concern, but also some joy. I visited with Gloria and Jerry Fastrup on Friday. They got a double whammy. Jerry had a small stroke a few weeks ago and was just recovering, and Gloria was his main caregiver, and she took a terrible fall, got lots of injuries, including a broken kneecap, and she had to have surgery this week on her kneecap. And so now they've got pretty much round-the-clock care at the house, and they're doing pretty well. They say they don't need anything right now, but I do think visits would be welcome, music visits particularly. Jerry played a little piano for me, and also I think maybe not just yet, but in the future it might be an opportunity for some meals. But not chicken soup. They told me they're not chicken soup people. More like meatloaf. The next candle is from Rebecca Robb, whose beloved uncle, Edwin Albert Foster, a retired lawyer and poet, just passed away. His death was expected, but still came as a shock. And she's concerned for her Aunt Joan, and said she'd love positive thoughts and prayers and vibes to go out to her, and that she and her mom, who's also a member here of the fellowship, would really appreciate your holding them all in your thoughts. Next candle is from Ann Geyer, who writes, "My brother Peter Geyer was admitted to the hospital." She wrote tonight, that was yesterday. "He has blood clots in his lungs and is very weak and disoriented. We're particularly worried because his body has been weakened by years of cancer treatment for 3 different cancers. We love him so much and pray we don't lose him." And Jürgen, and I think others too, light a candle for a peaceful U.S. presidential inauguration tomorrow. Diego, any on Zoom? No? Okay. We light our blue candle once again for all those whose lives have been affected, displaced, those who've been killed, those who've lost loved ones, those who've lost their homes, those who've lost so much in the unjust and unprovoked war in the Ukraine. And we light our red candle today with some hope for the Middle East. We hope that this ceasefire in Gaza will hold. I don't know if the hostages were released. When I left my home this morning, they were still waiting for the first release to come. I guess they did. So for the continued release of the hostages and for hopefully finding them in reasonable medical condition, and for, above all, a permanent path which recognizes the worth and dignity of every person in the area, a permanent path to peace. And we light our final candle for all those joys, sorrows, and concerns held deep in our hearts, but which remain unspoken this morning. If you would like to come forward and silently light a candle for whatever may be weighing on your heart this morning, or whatever you may have in your mind, please come forward now, and we'd love to have you do that. I now invite you to participate in one of our UU hymns. It's a chant. It'll be on video. You're welcome to listen or sing along. The words will be on the screen. You'll see it overlays with things, but where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? It's just kind of the repeated refrain. So if you want to just join in that, please do, or just kind of take in all the voices.
Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Mystery, mystery. Life is a riddle and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going?
Well, you got the questions. Where do we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? And after joining in that chant, you might be thinking, this is going to be a sermon about the evolution of the species. And of course, with Charles Darwin as one who we claim as one of our illustrious forebears, although that claim is a bit dubious, his mother was a Unitarian. But certainly, as a religion that embraces science, we're often reminded of the oneness we share with all living things in the incredible process of evolution of which our species is a result. But today's sermon is not about the evolution of the species. Rather, it's about the evolution of a faith tradition, the evolution of a religion. And perhaps that's one of the very first things one might want to understand about Unitarian Universalism. I guess it's where we should start when we try to answer those questions. We start with the idea that, yes, we change. We have changed, we are changing, and we will continue to change. Unlike religions who recite creeds that date back to the 4th century, and whose recitation of Scripture often ends with the words, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, we acknowledge that our religion has changed and will continue to do so. But being open to change does not mean that we've rejected our history. So I'd like to spend time with that first question of where do we come from? The roots of our faith are in the Jewish and Christian traditions. We derive our Unitarian name and the concept of the oneness of the divine from the monotheistic Israelites. You remember the stories of Moses and the Exodus from Egypt and coming down from Mount Sinai, outraged by the people worshiping the golden calf. In a world then where worship of multiple gods was the norm, Judaism saw things differently. If you want to get into the exegesis of the critical passage of Deuteronomy, you can argue about whether early Judaism only prohibited the worship of other gods or believed that there was only one God. But there's no doubt, by about 800 years before the time of Jesus, it was unquestionably the case that Jews believed there was only one God. Now you may say, well, I'm not sure, or I don't believe in a God or gods at all. Well, as I mentioned before, we change, and we do not all believe alike. Some of us believe in a God or a God force, others of us do not. But we can all unite in the idea of oneness, that we are one not just with other humans, but all creation, interconnected and from a single source. We now know that's what science teaches us, but long before there was a scientific understanding of that, There was a philosophical and theological one that we embraced that recognizes that there's a spiritual force of love, of justice, of life, in which we are all one. Well, when Jesus, a zealot Jew, came along, a new religion slowly began to evolve around his teachings. And there were many thoughts about who he was. Some thought, and some still do think, he was another great prophet of Judaism. And some felt that he himself was more than merely human, maybe a god. For the Unitarian Jews of the time, that idea smacked of polytheism again. In addition to Jesus being co-equal with God, the idea of God in three persons, adding this Holy Spirit, was fiercely debated in the early Christian church, and we were there. We argued against the idea at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, when the Emperor Constantine tried to unify the empire by unifying the church with one set of beliefs. In that debate, a man named Arius, our guy, argued the Unitarian position that Jesus was not the same as God, and that there was nothing in the Bible to support this idea of the Trinity. He lost, but the idea didn't get forgotten. Other Unitarian Universalist ideas developed in the early Christian church as well. As early as the 2nd century, our forebears, one like named Origen, argued that faith and knowledge were not opposed to each other, and that the use of reason was appropriate in matters of religion, which of course greatly elevated the importance of individual thought in religion. Our ancestors in the 5th and 6th century argued against the idea that human beings were totally depraved and sinful, and that only a select few would be among the saved. They instead argued for the recognition of the goodness in human nature, and that a loving God damns no one. That's to say, universal salvation. These views were all deemed heretical by the early Christian church. Many of the progressive religious ideas were then lost in the Dark Ages, but they reappear again in the Renaissance. Unitarians were part of the Reformation that swept Europe in the 16th century. We were there, but our ancestors tried to take the Reformation quite a bit further. And when they did, they were persecuted not only by the Jesuits who were protecting Catholic doctrine, but by the more conservative reformers as well. In fact, one of our ancestors, Michael Servetus, who wrote a book with a title that was sure to get him in big trouble, the title was Errors of the Doctrine of the Trinity, which the Inquisition didn't particularly like. He was burnt at the stake for heresy in Switzerland, seemingly with the blessing of John Calvin, who was there. His fellow Unitarian heretics escaped to the protection of Eastern Europe, first to Poland and then to Hungary, where they flourished for a time, and then the Counter-Reformation largely silenced them. But then to Transylvania, where by the mid-1500s, our first and only Unitarian king declared religious freedom for everyone. Today, there are still some 400 Unitarian churches in Transylvania. From Europe, via Scandinavia, Unitarianism spread to England, where Unitarian congregations still flourish. Now, I use the word heretic several times now. For some, that word may make you feel uncomfortable, but it shouldn't. It comes from a Greek word that basically means to choose. And that brings us to another important point about Unitarian Universalism. We have always chosen what we believe for ourselves and never compelled or required anyone to believe a particular way. That's the hallmark to be part of what's called the free church tradition. Freedom of belief is the cornerstone of this faith. Oops. Well, you see, we have a rich European history. But what about on the American side, across the ocean? Well, although we have cousins in Europe, American Unitarian Universalism is really homegrown. And it's a huge, huge part of American history. If you were to remove the Unitarian Universalists from the American history books, or for that matter, the anthologies of American literature or poetry, the records of scientific discoveries, even the music literature, as Paula is showing to us today, there would be enormous holes. Of course, here in Mexico, we've brought the tradition with us. But in the U.S., we are the descendants of the Puritans who came in the 1600s. But by the late 1700s, some of them were influenced by the Enlightenment, and reason became a part of our religion. We challenged the Calvinist doctrine of the Puritan churches in New England congregations, and they began to split, liberals and conservatives. Once again, we were the heretics, but this time we fared a lot better than the European predecessors did. And you might know, in most New England towns, where we separated from our more traditional congregational brothers and sisters, usually we were in the majority. And most often, in that divorce, we got the church building. That's why, if you do a little travel in New England, the oldest church in most towns in New England is usually the Unitarian. Did you know that at one time, the majority of the people in Boston were members of Unitarian congregations? And Thomas Jefferson once wrote these words: "There's not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian." I confidently expect that the present generation will see Unitarianism become the general religion of the United States. Well, a wave of immigration, largely from Catholic countries, and a Puritan Christian revivalism soon changed the tide. But both Unitarian and Universalism have remained strong in the U.S. Both have contributed to history, literature, science, art, philosophy, social justice, music, well beyond their numbers would suggest. We're a small denomination, but our contributions have been amazing. Let me mention a few. In government, presidents John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Millard Fillmore, William Howard Taft, presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson, Supreme Court justices Oliver Wendell Holmes and William O. Douglas, reformers like Horace Mann for public education, Dorothea Dix, who worked for decent treatment of prisoners and mentally ill, Clara Barton, who founded the American Red Cross, Susan B. Anthony, Olympia Brown, and most of the women's suffrage movement. Modern civil rights leaders like Whitney Young and James Reed. Great authors and philosophers like Emerson, Thoreau, Longfellow, Margaret Fuller, Bronson Alcott, Louisa May Alcott, Herman Melville, and it goes on. Architects like Frank Lloyd Wright. Composers like Arthur Foote, who Paula played for you today. Scientists like Alexander Graham Bell and Samuel Morse. And it goes on and on. And for you Canadians, lest we leave you out, Unitarian Universalism in your country also has a rich history going back to the early 1800s and includes John MacDonnell, the first Prime Minister of Canada, Emily Stow, the first Canadian woman doctor, the great humanitarian Lada Hitchmanova, who was the founder of the Unitarian Service Committee of Canada, and authors like Margaret Lawrence and Robert Munch. And speaking of authors, you might guess that the Unitarian influence in Canada came from the UK, where renowned authors like Charles Dickens and Beatrix Potter were writing Unitarian values into their works. So we're part of a very proud tradition that has contributed so much. And who knows, maybe we'll add a couple of famous Mexicans to the list someday. Our history is important, but we've also broadened to include many other beliefs and traditions into our tradition. Humanism, Buddhism, other Eastern religions, and many native and earth-centered traditions have been welcomed into the lexicon of theologies that make up Unitarian Universalist theologies. So that brings us to the second question. What or who are we? What kind of religion are we today? Although we've changed, and we do not have the same theology that does not mean that we lack a common faith tradition. Over the past year or two, you heard several sermons about the revision, what's commonly called the Sources and Principles section in Article 2 of the UUA bylaws. What I like most about that revision is the diagram used to express it, centering love. Love is represented as a flame in our chalice, and spinning off from that flame are values grounded in love, like generosity and justice and interdependence and equity and transformation and pluralism. Think for a moment about what it means to belong to a religion that centers love. Love is made manifest in things like justice and generosity, a profound recognition of interdependence, and a commitment to pluralism and equity, in creating our community and our personal commitment, as well as in our spiritual work of transforming ourselves. You know, because we have no creed and freedom of belief is central to who we are, some critics suggest that means that we're not a religion at all. Not so. We are religion in the truest sense of the word. The root word from which the word religion is derived means to bind together. And there's no mission more important to us than creating and sustaining the beloved community of binding together, where all are welcome and none are excluded. This is such an important part of who we are. The entire service next Sunday is going to focus on that. We like to say we do not all have to believe alike to love alike. That is, that a common theology is not what's important or what unites us. There are folks from many different theological traditions in this room right now. Christians, Jews, theists, humanists, those who connect with Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, perhaps Muslims or earth-centered theologies, even those who prefer to say they identify with a philosophy rather than a theological tradition. We are a religion where all those can come together in worship in community. In doing that, we don't seek the least common denominator. We seek the value in each of those traditions, and we respect each of them. Think of the troubled world where we live, and can you think of any kind of religion that is more needed than that? And truth is, most of us draw meaning, tradition, and spiritual practice from a variety of traditions. We're all what my friend, the Reverend James Ishmael Ford, who has preached for you here before, calls hyphenated religionists. For example, in his book, he identifies himself as a humanist Christian Buddhist. We are theologically pluralists, most of us. But one thing I think we all share is that our inward theological thoughts do not matter as much as our embodied theology does. We all believe in the value of human effort. It's deeds, not creeds, that matter. Where many religions believe that all revelation is contained in just one religious text, you know, the Bible or the Quran, we take a very different view. We respect the teachings of Scripture. We interpret them in a way that comports with our world. We go beyond those texts to poets, writers, thinkers of our own time, and beyond that to sharing what we learned from our own life experience and interactions with our world. Today, we too address those same big questions based on our experience of the world. And therefore, we are no less religious in practice than those seekers of biblical time who did the same in the context of their understanding of the world. To put it simply, we believe that revelation, or if you prefer, the search for truth and meaning, is not closed, but ongoing and available to us in all sorts of places. We believe in the call of conscience, that still small voice within us that some call the voice of God and others do not. We come together in worship for we know we need to. We need to be reminded regularly to heed that voice of conscience, to be our best selves. In our worship, we explore not only our own spiritual growth, but engagement with the issues of our world. So that brings me to the final question. Where are we going? We can really only scratch the surface of that question this morning, but it's one that I want to leave with you. The answer to the question of where will we go as a fellowship and as a denomination depends on you. You see, I find it difficult to believe that we as a denomination are in fact as small as we are, when I know that the very thing that we offer is exactly what lots and lots of people want in their lives. Sadly, we seem to have embraced an attitude of smallness. I don't think we truly live up to being an inclusive congregation or denomination, one that's really inclusive, not just based on race or sexual orientation, but truly theologically inclusive, or politically inclusive, or class inclusive. Sometimes we value our congregation's uniqueness, independence, and autonomy to the point that we often fail to see ourselves as part of a larger religious movement that offers a clear alternative to what the religious right is offering. I think the question of where we're going will be answered by whether or not we really are interested in being part of something larger, rather than self-limiting and self-confining. Moreover, it seems to me we often pride ourselves more on what we are not rather than on what we are. I am so tired of hearing us defined in the negative. So if you're asked, is it true Unitarian Universalists don't believe in the Bible? Tell them that we acknowledge that the Bible is one text that contains great truths, but there are many others too which we can learn from. If people ask, is it really true that you don't have a creed? Tell them we believe a well-developed conscience will be a better guide to you than any creed. When they ask you, is it true that Unitarian Universalists can believe anything they want? Tell them no. Tell them that we center love and we embrace the values and principles that are grounded in love, justice, generosity, equity, and so forth. Tell them that centering love means standing on that side of justice and peace and proclaiming it to all people. All people includes gay, lesbians, but also Muslim, Jews, and immigrants. It also means living the message right here in our community with real compassion and caring for those in need of our help. Centering love translates down to the smallest thing each of us do. Centering love means recognizing our interdependence, loving the earth and all her creatures, not just the human ones. Our future will depend upon the message we send out about who we are and who we want to be, and what an opportunity we have here in Mexico. For years, our faith tradition has talked about becoming more multicultural, multilingual, and here in Mexico, we actually have the opportunity to do that. And I'm really so proud that we're working hard at that, having our religious education program where children are taught in Spanish, bringing in bilingual and multicultural guest ministers, and right now working really hard to try and find a bilingual, bicultural minister to be in residence with us for a while who can really help us to do that work. I think as UUs, and especially as UUs here in Mexico, we really have a bright and exciting future. So whether you are a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, or if this is the very first service you've ever attended, I hope right now you're saying yes. That makes sense. That is my religion, even if I didn't know all those things before. And maybe you're thinking about, so where do we go from here? So I'd like to end with some thoughts this morning from one of my favorite Unitarian ministers of the mid-20th century, Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies, who wrote these words. We are the consummation of thousands of years of religious history. We are thousands of years that have stripped off superstition and battled with tyranny, thousands of years that have troubled to take fear out of religion, to take it right out of human life, thousands of years that have marched, sometimes joyfully, sometimes in agony, towards spiritual emancipation. We are indeed the consummation of something. Yet, in this world of blood and sorrow, it's scarcely important, hardly worth mentioning, unless in addition we are the beginning of something, unless our religion is new, the religion that has always been new in every prophet who died rather than forsake it, the religion that has been buried over and over again in creeds and rituals and sacred sepulchres, and yet has always come to life. The religion that today is new all over the earth, stammering itself into utterances in every language known to humankind. The religion that says freedom, freedom from ignorance and false belief, freedom from spurious claims and bitter prejudices, freedom to seek the truth both old and new, freedom to follow it, freedom from the hates and the greeds that divide humankind and spill the blood of every generation, freedom for honest thought, freedom for equal justice, freedom to seek the true, the good, the beautiful, with minds unimpaired by cramping dogmas and spirits uncrippled by abject dependence. The religion that says humankind is not divided except by ignorance and prejudice and hate. The religion that sees humankind as naturally one and waiting to be spiritually united. The religion that proclaims an end to all exclusions and declares a brotherhood and sisterhood unbounded. The religion that knows we shall never find the fullness of the wonder and the glory of life until we're ready to share it. And that we shall never have hearts big enough for the love of God until we have them big enough for the worldwide love of one another. As you've listened to me, he goes on, have you thought perhaps this is your religion? If you have, do not congratulate yourself. Stop long enough to recollect the miseries of the world you live in, the fearful cruelties and enmities, the hate and the bitter prejudices, the need of such a world for such a faith. And if you still say that this of which I have spoken is your religion, then ask yourself the question, what are you doing with it? I invite you now to conclude these remarks with a hymn. It's hymn number 287, Faith of the Larger Liberty. Please rise as you're able in body or spirit, and the words will appear on the screen. Please be seated.
Hi, everybody. This is our time in the service, our time for generosity. Unitarian Universalism is a grand vision of a world filled with peace and justice, love and joy. That vision is embodied in a few large congregations, numerous mid-sized congregations, and many, many small congregations. No matter its size, every congregation depends on each of its members. Each one of you, by your commitment of time, energy, and resources, helps make that grand vision real. Individually and together, we are Unitarian Universalists. We know that your financial contributions to this congregation come from sacrifice and hard work. We're so grateful for this. And we commit together to ensure that the funds we gather collectively do a greater good for ourselves and our world than they would have done it alone. May this offering sustain and grow the life and mission of our congregation as we give in love and hope, and your offerings are gratefully received. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for joining me in helping lead us on a journey through Unitarian Universalism from the musical perspective. It's great to hear the music of one of our really noted composers of Unitarian past. Thank you all for being with us here today, and either here at the Aldea or on Zoom, and I hope you'll join us next week for what I think will be a different kind of look at Unitarian Universalism, less from the head and more from the heart, shall we say. But it'll be wonderful to have you here. After the service, we're going to have what we're calling New to UU pop-up sessions in the back room, which is back there. If you're new or relatively new to us and just have some questions, would like to talk with me and meet some others who are also new, and just grab a coffee and we'll go. And when Diego's going to ring the bell when we're ready to start in there. So when you hear the bell, go in and grab a seat. It's sort of like musical chairs here. We'll just do it that way. Also, you should know that many of you have taken it, but I will again be offering a UU 101 course. It's 3 sessions on Monday afternoons, February 17, 24, and March 10th. It's free to any of our members or even people contemplating membership, and you can sign up at the welcome table, but you'll also see notices going out from our administrator, Deanna Amaya, in the next week or so, so you can do it there as well. But there's a sign-up sheet over there if you want to reserve your place now. I mentioned that the message on Unitarian Universalism comes from a variety of places, and certainly 19th century Boston with Arthur Foote was one of those places. By the way, he was editor of one of our earlier hymnals. You probably read that. The words of our benediction come from another 19th century Boston Unitarian, the Reverend Theodore Parker, a great justice advocate, whose words made their way into the speeches of Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. You're familiar with the most famous that King quoted and is usually attributed to him: "The moral arch of the universe is long, but bends towards justice." That's Theodore Parker. Of our faith tradition, he wrote, "Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, the good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living." We now extinguish our flame, but not the light of our faith, that we carry with us till we meet again.